right, I think we're good to go. Hopefully, I don't get that top bit cut off in the playback. Feel free to let me know how that goes. Hello, and welcome to Kai Chi Alchemy. You can call me Katchi. This is a space of love, y'all. Welcome or welcome back. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever time it is, wherever you are in the cosmos when this is finding you. I want to thank y'all for showing up. Thanks for supporting the channel. Thank you for co-creating community with me. I really appreciate all of that engagement and everything that has helped to grow this channel to 77 subscribers over the last 14 months or whatever it's been. Today I had a crazy morning where the um I had some challenges. I made a big mistake that kind of reminded me of something that would have or has happened in the past many times, but I got to have that moment of like, oh, yes, this feels so familiar. And also, do you remember what the familiar response to this situation would be historically? You know what I mean? And I feel like, we had a good save, a good attitude about it, and it really worked out fine. But in the past, it might have spiraled just because one mistake is like, dangerous, the end of the world. That definitely feels pertinent to the message today. I was downloading like static. This morning, I couldn't even put on music or anything, which was part of the issue. Like, I didn't do my normal morning routine, and so I missed some information that I normally would have gotten first thing in the morning. And so I made a miscalculation that made me look really bad, probably. Um, and with with the yeah, it was because I just felt like any noise was too much noise. Everything was overstimulating. Everything was too much. And when you turned off all of that, you would feel and hear the static. And then I was downloading this that song Pre-Roll by Queen Herbie, and I thought it was interesting that it kind of tied together static and um, that that concept. And it reminded me of an experience when I was a child. The first time that I ever got high was like not on purpose. I'm sure that's happened to many people. And I was like maybe 15 years old, and my friend or my mom's husband, while they were still dating, like came over and we had like a little dinner party, and some of our friends came over and their kids. And so my parents were, or my mom and the adults were talking about the dinner that they had planned, and all this like herbal infused risotto and artichokes and seafood and stuff. And they were gonna make pizza bagels for the kids. And I was like, oh, that's not fair. I don't want pizza bagels. Why can't I have the seafood and everything? But I hadn't really picked up on the fact that they were talking about the fact that this was an edible. And once I realized what they were talking about, I was like kind of too embarrassed to clear it up. And so I just went ahead with it. And my family was always very much like, if you're going to do this, I'd prefer you to do it here and not on the streets, kind of thing. And I have very mixed opinions about that kind of approach. But in any case, there was a reason I had never done that before. I've been diagnosed in many different environments as an INFJ, and INFJs and INTJs tend to be labeled the sober stoner for a very good reason. And I had always had people tell me, like, you don't need that. you're already that's naturally where you're at, and I just believed them and I trusted them, and in fact, I think that they're very accurate in that. But again, I had this kind of shame, embarrassment, people-pleasing, masking thing going on, and I didn't wanna embarrass myself by saying, "Oh, I misunderstood you guys. I didn't realize that you were eating edibles tonight. I just really wanted seafood. I just really wanted artichokes." Like, I don't know if I how I feel about this now. And so because it was the first time that had ever happened to me, and I ate a lot, and I was very young. I wasn't that small. I was very overweight, so I guess there wasn't that part of it. But still, it was the first time I had ever experienced anything like that. The first time that I had those compounds in my system since I was in my mom's belly. Like, so it was a big deal. And I remember being in the bedroom with the kids, saying something to my little sister. I can't remember if the TV was on or off, but either way, I was like, the TV, it's like vibrating or something like that. That's the feeling that I got this morning. It was static. It was vibrating. It was like so much information, so much movement, so much noise that it drowned everything out into white noise. Does that make sense? And I felt this feeling of like Gemini season coming on, which always gives me so much anxiety. I really struggle with Gemini energy in general. And so when I feel the end of Taurus season happening, it's like I gotta brace myself, I gotta get prepared. Um, so basically, the download that I was getting was that you need to make a container and download the whole thing, the whole block of clay, the thing where you can't see it. It doesn't make sense. Like, it's white noise. It's a big block of clay. You don't see what it means. You don't see what's underneath it. You don't see the subliminal messages in the static. You know what I mean? And it's interesting also because they talk about that plant affecting people in the way where they're not able to tune things out. It's like you're taking in all of this information, which is why introverted, intuitive, Myers-Briggs types are known as the sober stoner, because you're just naturally always in monk mode, taking in all of the information indiscriminately, and that can lead to some really beautiful things. Um, Sometimes it's not useful, but I mean, right here, that is the energy that I'm getting. It's like drop the anxiety, drop the control, drop the intention, like the bracing, and make so much space and so much quiet and so much room in your life, so much free time, so much empty space in your life that you're able to download something in the white noise in its entirety. And then you'll be able to like push away all the pieces that aren't pertinent to your situation, your life, the time right now. And so that is the white noise, that is the static. And the only way to process that in a productive way is to be in that sitting in silence space, which you need to create space for, right? Um, no, yeah. Tarot is not fortune telling and we don't read the future. Um, yes, indeed. Hello. And then we got El Alacran and El Melon. And what I was getting very much from this was bitter, sweet. There may be some Scorpio going on. And also, interestingly, when I pulled a little bit of tarot for you guys, we got the Chariot in the past, which is the card of Cancer. And today, before all that crazy stuff happened, I was intending to do a movement medicine video about Cancer, which we will get around to today, but it actually inspired what was going on here today in a lot of ways. And then this was the first tarot card that came out when I was pulling them. So there's a big theme here about parenting, about childhood, about motherhood. Cancer is the sign of the mother, and it's about like holding things to your chest, and like loving things, like taking care of things. It's about home, you know? It's about being that mother for yourself. It's about reparenting. And because all of that was coming through, I found the shadow work cards that we pulled very interesting. But before I get into that real quick, I also, when I went in threes, after the Chariot, we got the King of Wands and the King of Swords, which are both they're kind of like higher, not in a like better or worse, but like higher masculine energies. And they're like the thoughts, the mental and spiritual aspects of this masculine energy. So this is like the mother, and this is like the father, but it's also about being a father energy for yourself and for others, perhaps, that knows how to speak with conviction and knows how to be grounded in your purpose, like your transformational fire, your ability to communicate, to excavate, to like do that sculpture process that we were talking about. With the oracle cards, we got live your dreams, persevere, lose the word if. Okay, and then I got in the past for shadow work, unprocessed grief. It says loss, sorrow, emotional stagnation. Yeah. So this is the theme that we're talking about today, unprocessed grief. And I would say that for the vast majority of human beings, you're going to resonate with part of this message because we all, in some way or another, in the modern world, have experienced neglect and abuse to a certain degree, even if it's just by being born in a dismissive, violent, unhealthy culture and, you know, being fed into those legal systems and medical systems and social systems and all of the rest of it. But also, a lot of us have very specific childhood trauma specific to our parents, our caregivers, our immediate environment when we were growing up. And because this is something that people didn't even really talk about a lot until recently, it was very unprocessed. It was very masked. It was very unappreciated. It was very unseen. It was very invisible. Lots of people went through it, but it was very invisible. In the present position, though, we got forgiveness sets you free, release, unhooking, and peace. So this is about healing childhood trauma. This is about forgiving yourself, about forgiving your culture, about forgiving your family line. And you may be going through that process right now. And I would say that the reading that we're going to do today is going to be really useful in pursuing that process of forgiving. Because it's simple, but it's not easy. Otherwise, everybody would forgive everybody, and we would live in a paradise on earth today already. But then I saw, oh man, what did we do? In the future, we have, hold your inner child, love, safety, reparenting. I was just talking about that. Reparenting, love, safety, reparenting, creating a container for yourself, creating safety for yourself so that you can download weird shit in its entirety and process it without fear of it like triggering any of these wounds that we will be talking about. Hold your inner child. And we were going to be reading today. I got a very strong download about this, even though we have been discussing maybe starting other books first. This is The Continuum Concept by Jean Liedloff. And I know that this is the next one that we need to be getting into, so we're going to read the introduction today. But holding your inner child as you look through these wounds that you are forgiving, that you are moving past, that you are working through, there's kind of What was I getting? Performer, image management, validation, addiction, emotional split. We were talking about the masking. We were talking about the unprocessed grief because of the inability to forgive, because of the inability to name and acknowledge the abuse and neglect. And it's a whole process. And if you take one piece out, it shifts all the gears. It makes it work different. It doesn't work right anymore. So, no matter who you are, if you're resonating with this message today, you are healing through some performer wounds, some daddy issues, some feelings of being valued only for how you mask, how you perform, how you show up in a system. You know what I mean? And on either side of that, that could represent for you, well, it could be both. You could like flip flop between two things. Um, Maybe started in one extreme and you've ended up in another extreme. But we have invisible one, shrinking, hiding, fear of being seen on the one hand, masking, in trying to make yourself invisible, trying to take on all the blame, trying to do good enough so nobody sees and says anything, trying to do bad enough so that nobody's jealous, like trying to be as quiet, unassuming, unproblematic as humanly possible, to be as as invisible as possible. I was born where I was supposed to be a Capricorn, and I was not born in a hospital. But my mom was so intent on having me before the end of her Christmas break so she could bond with me, which is like a total mental construct weirdness. I am totally all about attachment parenting, but it kind of defeats the purpose if you're in stress and anxiety and force. And so she was in stress and anxiety and force, and she managed to naturally induce that birth, like running up and down the block, chugging castor oil, getting stressed out. And it worked. And I am a Sagittarius because of her. Um, and there's a lot of beauty in that. There's a lot of good things that came from it. But I would cite that as one of my earliest experiences of being forced to exist in a way that I do not naturally exist, that caused a great deal of stress and trauma on me and caused me to feel like my safety and my existence um, was threatened by, you know, not lining up with expectations and being too me and being too specific and not lining up with what the people around me need me to be. And when I was growing up, my mom would always cite me as sweet and quiet and like, you set me up like, to think that all babies were like this. And I do think all babies are naturally like this. You go to a lot of places in like third world countries and hunter gatherer tribes, babies rarely cry. There's no need. Like they're energetically, emotionally connected to everything. They're not super stressed out beyond the necessity of their day-to-day life. They're so attuned to their parents. Their parents know when they need to use the restroom. They know when they need to eat. They know when, and they don't have to really talk about it. And there's a sense of trust and a sense of safety that leads to a culture where there's very, 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 very little crying and screaming baby stuff. And that leads to very vibrant and happy people with no money. Interesting. We're going to read about that today in this book, The Continuum Concept by Jean Liedloff. So this is one extreme, is you can be shut down and maybe you don't, like me, barely don't even remember what it was like before you were shut down. And it's maybe not even a part of your identity. It might be hard for you to see that you're invisible or that you're trying to be invisible or that's how that's how you're showing up. This can also show up it could be both, either or, as know-it-all, overcompensation, defensiveness, ego shield. This is being attacked by your surroundings, by your support system, to a point where you are willing to stand up and rage against it. You're willing to say, this isn't me. And no matter how much discontent and discord it seems to cause in the moment, I am going to stay attached to my ideas, to my needs, my goals, my desires, because we can't have this equanimity. We can't have this you and me. My own parents, my own support system, my own culture um, is coming at me with distrust and maybe even hatred. And the only way to protect myself from that, besides the sycophancy and the invisibility, is to remove my identity entirely from the situation. I am not you. I am what I am, and it doesn't matter one bit what you think about it, how it affects you. And this can be taken to an extreme. This energy can be very useful for people that are stuck in invisibility and shrinking, hiding, fear of being seen, almost like a humility energy of the invisibility side of the spectrum can be very helpful for people stuck in this ego defense mechanism stuff. Ego shield, defensiveness, overcompensation, trying to puff your chest out, trying to be bigger, trying to be more. And these are all responses to childhood trauma. People are not naturally narcissistic. People are not naturally codependent enablers. It's not it's not part of the blueprint, but it doesn't matter because nobody uses the blueprint anymore. So we have to take in a whole lot of information in order to move past this issue because it's so big and complicated and something that we don't have a ton of historical context for. People have not been living with agriculture and compulsory schooling and all of these systems that tear people away from their communities and from their motherland for very long. It's been a blip in the eye of human history, is really not what we're about. But because it's so novel and because it's such a weird situation we find ourselves in, that it's hard to take examples from the past to resolve, we have to get really creative. We have to take in all the possibilities. And sometimes that's scary about that Gemini energy. It's like, if I take in all the possibilities, am I going to lose myself? Do I have to protect myself? Do I have to protect my ego identity? Or do I have to hide? Do I have to blend in to survive? Performer. And to decide to not be a performer in a society and an environment that is like a stage and that people treat that way, it's problematic. But you can't blame yourself for that. You have to forgive yourself for that. You have to feel that grief. You have to process that grief. You have to hold your inner child through that process of forgiving yourself, forgiving your caretakers, forgiving your culture. Forgiveness. I also drew the two of paper. The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. The book itself or the author or something in there may be relevant to you or a confirmation or something. I believe that this is the Two of Pentacles. So I originally thought paper was swords for some reason, but even if it's pentacles, it's pretty similar meaning in that you're at a choice point right now, right? You can choose to do this work of processing the grief that lots of people won't even validate as real in the first place. To take the space to work through that forgiveness, to show yourself love, to create safety, to go through that reparenting process. You have to lose the word if, you have to persevere, you have to live your dreams. It is a dream. It's not something you probably know much about if this is really childhood rooted. It's probably one of those things where you don't remember before you were burnout. You don't remember before you were invisible. You don't remember before you were defensive, before you were cold. What's that song? I'll post it in the community tab. Many Men by 50 Cent. Yeah. Your heart turned cold. But if you make a choice to hold this space and go through this process, that ice heart is gonna melt, and you need to go through that process. It's gonna get wet on the floor, it's gonna get slippery, it's gonna get dangerous, it's gonna be unpredictable, but do it anyways. But I don't listen to me, don't just do it because I say so. That's not gonna work. You have to make a choice. You have to make a decision where you feel it in your bones, or you feel it in your body, where you take practical action steps towards that. I'm going to read this just because I haven't pulled this card for y'all yet. It says, like Junior trying to find balance between two worlds while pursuing his dreams, the Two of Paper sees you struggling to juggle multiple priorities. Take things one step at a time until you find the best path. So have patience with yourself on this process. Have patience with yourself, because it makes sense that you're struggling to juggle multiple priorities. It makes sense that you're struggling to balance this identity and this performance that you feel like you have to continue in order to survive in this world, and this working through the root of the desire and the belief that you need to be in that performance in order to survive in this world. Because that's not true, but you have to find evidence that it's not true, and that's a process. It's not just like, oh, Spirit didn't show me exactly why this is right or wrong, so it's ambiguous. It's a process. It's unfolding, and in fact, you're supposed to be taking it like slowly. Remember, you download the whole static, you download the whole white noise, you download the whole piece of clay, and it's going to take you a while to work through that. So just be prepared for that. Lose the word if. Forget about the cost. Persevere. Live your dreams at all costs, or don't. But then don't complain about it. One way or the other. Understand and accept that this is all in your hands. It's simple. It's not easy. And then it says, challenged for explicit language, the absolute true diary of a part-time Indian uses humor and captivating narrative to balance a thoughtful exploration of cultural identity and assimilation. Right. This is complicated. You can't literally cut yourself off. I mean, sometimes people need to go no contact with their families and stuff and whatever, but like, you can't energetically cut yourself off from that stuff. It's going to affect you. It's a part of you. There's a lot I could say about that. Assimilating into one culture, having a cultural identity with another culture. So it's like you were born with your soul and your spirit, and that was your cultural identity. And then you assimilated into this culture, and that became your cultural identity. And now you're understanding where that came from and why it's not the truest frequency to your soul. And so now you are assimilating to a new culture. What is that? Heaven to hell to heaven. That's the descent. That's like the goddess comes to earth and rises and creates things and has children. What do you want to create? Whatever it is, you're going to need to be a clear, open channel. You're going to need to be a vessel capable of bringing that into the world. So get really clear on it. Sure, I'm sure you've been doing that for a long time if you have a real established ego identity, or you're invisible and you have a real rich inner world that nobody knows anything about. Either way. But it's kind of a need to let go of the control and soften the edges and let go of the timeline and the expectations and to just be committed to the process to such an extent that you would do it anyways, one way or the other, even if you knew you might never get what you want. That's how to live a fulfilled, happy life, is to do the things that you would do regardless of whether or not you believed that you were definitely going to achieve them. And usually that's when the achieving of those things becomes the most beautiful and balanced and productive. This is a very long section, so I'm going to get into it. I know we're 30 minutes in. Introduction. Some reports and thoughts for the new edition. On parents. 3 months before this book was published in 1975, a friend asked me to lend my proof copy to a couple who were expecting their first baby. They both read it promptly. I met Millicent when she came to lunch with Seth, who was by then 3 months old. She told me that she and her husband Mark, a doctor, were convinced that my ideas made sense because they corresponded to their own feelings. She was very keen that other parents read the book, but worried that some might be discouraged by the idea that they had to carry the baby about constantly for months. I could see the point, she said, but I was sure I was not going to lug the equivalent of a 10 or 15-pound sack of potatoes around all day and night. I'm afraid you might put people off altogether. Why don't you just stick to put the shopping in the baby carriage and carry the baby, as I heard you say on the radio? Most of them will probably be willing to do that, and when they get home, they'll want to go on carrying. I never did put Seth down because I didn't feel like it. That was the idea, I said. It's only when the baby is there and your feelings for it are not negated that it works, not because someone said you should. Nor would you be likely to want to be stuck in the service of just a baby to that extent before you had met and fallen in love with it. I solved the problem of my bath by taking Seth in with me and bathing him at the same time. She went on. If Mark gets home in time, he can't resist jumping in too. He loves sleeping with Seth as much as I do. Luckily, I have a printing business with a friend, so I don't have to quit my job. I work standing up, and by now I'm used to having him in a sling on my back or hip. I can swing him around to the front if he wants to feed. He doesn't have to cry. He just grunts and reaches. At night, too, he only has to nuzzle about, and I know he's hungry. I just plug in a bosom and don't even really have to wake up. I found ways to use all my housework and gardening without putting Seth down. I put him down only when I'm making a bed and bounce him around among the sheets and blankets, but he loves that. And I do wait until Mark can help me to bring the coal up from the basement. The only time Seth and I are separated is when I'm riding my horse. A friend holds him then, but I'm always eager to take him back at the end of the ride. It feels right to have him with me. Seth was relaxed and quiet through lunch, and, like the iguana babies I describe in the book, no trouble to hold. It is understandable that Western babies are not welcome in offices, shops, workrooms, or even dinner parties. They usually shriek and kick, wave their arms, and stiffen their bodies so that one needs 2 hands and a lot of attention to keep them under control. It seems that they are keyed up with undischarged energy from spending so much time out of contact with an active person's naturally discharging energy field. When they are picked up, they are still rigid with tension and try to rid themselves of the discomfort by flexing their limbs or signaling the person holding them to bounce them on a knee or toss them in the air. Millicent was surprised at the difference between Seth's body tone and that of other babies. He was soft, she said. The others all felt like pokers. We need to recognize that by treating babies the way that we did for hundreds of thousands of years, we can be assured of calm, soft, undemanding little creatures. Only then can working mothers, unwilling to be bored and isolated all day with no adult companionship, rid themselves of their cruel conflict. Babies taken to work are where they need to be, with their mothers, and the mothers are where they need to be, with their peers, not doing baby care, but something worthy of intelligent adults. However, employers are not likely to be receptive to the idea until the reputation of babies improves. Miss Magazine made a heroic effort to bring babies into the office, but it need not have been so heroic had the babies been in physical contact with someone instead of isolated in carriers on nearby desks. Not everyone has been able to put continuum principles into practice as early and as happily as did Millicent and Mark, who now have more children brought up like Seth. One mother, Anthea, wrote me that as soon as she read the book, she realized she should have listened to her own instincts instead of to the baby care experts. Now she had a 4-year-old Trevor to whom she had done all the wrong things. Another baby was on its way. It would be a continuum baby from the start. But what to do about Trevor? It is difficult to carry a 4-year-old about in order to make up for his lost in arms stage. Also, it is important that he play and explore and learn as befits his chronological age. So I suggested to Anthea and her husband Brian that they take Trevor to sleep with them at night and, during the day, leave things pretty much as they were, except for encouraging the boy to sit on their laps and being physically available to him whenever possible. I also asked them to keep a daily record of what happened. It was soon after the book had come out, and I thought their experience might be useful to others. Anthea kept the record faithfully. For the first few nights, none of them had much sleep. Trevor would wriggle and whine. There were toes up noses, elbow and ears. Glasses of water were called for at ungodly hours. Once Trevor jockeyed himself into a perpendicular position, forcing Anthea and Brian to cling to the edges of the mattress. Many mornings, Brian stomped off to his office, red-eyed and irritable. But they persevered, unlike others who, after 3 or 4 trial nights, would say to me, "It doesn't work, we couldn't sleep," and give up. After 3 months, Anthea reported that there were no more disturbances. All three slept blissfully through the night. Not only did their relationship to Trevor improve markedly, but so did their relationship to each other. And, she said at the end of her report, mentioning it for the first time, Trevor stopped being aggressive at school. Some months later, Trevor moved back to his own bed of his own accord. He had had his fill of what would have been the infant sleeping experience. His new sister was in the parents' bed too, and even after he had moved out, he knew he was welcome back whenever he felt the need. Why not to feel guilty about not having been the only one in Western civilization to treat your child correctly? You are not the only person, not just your parents, but you are not the only person that treats yourself in the messed up way that you do. And it's understandable. But this is why to not feel bad. Another mother, Rachel, whose family of 4 was half grown, wrote, "I think your book was one of the cruelest things I have ever read. I am not suggesting that you should not have written it. I am not even saying that I wish I had not read it. It's simply that it impressed me profoundly, hurt me deeply, intrigued me greatly. I do not want to face the possible truth of your theory, and am trying my best to avoid facing it. God forgive you for that sequence about what babies go through, by the way, because, in the deathless words of Noel Coward, I never shall." It's a wonder to me, as a matter of fact, that you were not tarred and feathered at some stage. Every mother who reads it must do everything she can to avoid its implications. Do you know, I honestly believe that it was only while I thought that all the aggravation we go through was normal and unavoidable, natural, to use a word one often hears by the way of comfort from other mothers, child psychologists, and books, that it was endurable at all. Now that you have intruded into my mind the idea that it could be otherwise, well, I don't mind telling you that for 24 hours after reading your book, not to mention during, I was so depressed, I felt like myself. Happily, she did not, and we have since become close friends. She, a great advocate of the continuum concept, and I, a great admirer of her honesty and her way with words. But the sentiments she expressed, the depression, the guilt, the regret, have occurred all too often among readers with grown children. Yes, of course, it is dreadful to think about what we have done with the best of intentions to the people we love the most. But let us think too about what our loving parents, equally ignorant and innocent, did to us, and what was undoubtedly done to them. Most of the literate world joins us in victimizing each new trusting babe. It has become the custom, for reasons I shall not speculate on here. Does any one of us, therefore, have the right to take the guilt or even the awful sense of having been cheated upon herself or himself as the one alone could have known better? If, on the other hand, fearing that unreasonable sense of personal guilt, we refuse to acknowledge what we all do to each other, then how can we hope to change? For example, consider Nancy, a beautiful white-haired woman who attended a lecture of mine in London. She told me that, since she and her daughter, who was 35, had both read my book, their understanding of their relationship had brought them closer together than they had ever been before. Another mother, Rosalind, told me how she had sunk into a weeping depression for several days after reading the book. Her husband was understanding and patiently took care of their two little girls, while Rosalind languished, unable to continue her life in the new light. At a certain point, she told me, I realized that my only way ahead was to read the book again, this time for strength. Mm. It's a process. It's going to be uncomfortable in the middle parts. We're not going to know how it's going to work out in the middle parts. It's going to require creative problem solving in the middle parts. And we are all traumatized by each other before we even come to understanding the truth of ourselves, of the realities of our loved ones, of the realities of our parents, of our recent ancestors. And for some people, they decide that that pain is too much to acknowledge. And when you come to that space of looking at the truth and you feel that pain, and you don't want to blame yourself, and you don't want to blame your parents, and you don't want to acknowledge it, you don't want to admit to it, you don't want to see it for what it is. And that's what keeps you stuck, and that's what keeps you trapped in this system, probably complicit in victimizing new trusting babes, as she says. So to break this cycle, it's going to be uncomfortable, it's going to be unpredictable. And that's why you have to persevere. That's why you have to lose the word if. That's why you have to get clear on your dreams and your why and be very locked in on it. It's not going to be easy. And you'll need inspiration and you'll need support for strength. whether that's books, whether that's people in your life, whether that's people on the internet or wherever you find that support, you know. And it's also important, if you're able, to kind of live between worlds. It would not be healthy for me to like over correct and like try and save my mother from this whole situation, but to remain open and to be firm with my boundaries and to remain open. In learning how to do that, we have a very different relationship today than we ever would before. And I don't know if she would be the person that she is today if it wasn't for that relationship. And I'm very grateful for that. So don't try to rush to the end. Don't try to find the perfect fix and force it to happen. Don't try to avoid the guilt. Don't try to avoid the shame. Feel it and understand that it's not necessarily all true and that you don't have to let it define how you move forward. On our strange inability to see. An acquaintance telephoned me one day in a great state of excitement over an experience he had on a bus. He found himself sitting behind a West Indian lady and a small child who were enjoying an easy, respectful relationship of a sort seldom seen in British society. It was beautiful, he said. I have just finished reading your book. And there they were, living illustrations. I've been among lots of people like them before without ever seeing what now seems so obvious. I certainly never appreciated the lesson they could be to us if we could understand how they get that way, and why we never do. So blind are we that there is actually an organization in England called the National Association for Parents of Sleepless Children. Apparently, it functions on the model of Alcoholics Anonymous, fortifying the victims of screaming babies with sympathy from fellow sufferers and consolations like, they do outgrow it eventually. Take turns with your spouse so that each of you can sleep sometimes while the other gets up. It won't hurt a baby to be left to cry if you know there is nothing wrong with it. The best they have to say is, if everything else fails, it won't really do the baby any harm to let it sleep in your bed. There is never a suggestion that they might call off the war and believe the babies who unanimously and perfectly clearly let everyone know where a baby's place is. On being child-centered or permissive. A parent whose day centers on childcare is not only likely to be bored and boring to others, but also likely to be giving an unwholesome kind of care. A baby's expectation is to be in the midst of an active person's life, in constant physical contact, witnessing the kinds of experiences he will have later in life. His role while in arms is passive, with all his senses observant. He enjoys occasional direct attention, kisses, tickles, being thrown in the air, and so on. But his main business is to absorb the actions, interactions, and surroundings of his caretaker, adult or child. This information prepares him to take his place among his people by helping him to understand, so to speak, at a baby who is looking inquiringly at, This information prepares him to take his place among his people by helping him to understand what they do. To thwart this powerful urge by looking inquiringly, so to speak, at a baby who is looking inquiringly at you creates profound frustration. It manacles his mind. The baby's expectation of a strong, busy central figure to whom he can be peripheral is undermined by an emotionally needy, servile person who is seeking his acceptance or approval. The baby will increasingly signal, but it will not be for more attention. It is actually a demand for the appropriate kind of experience. Much of his frustration is due to his inability to make his signals that things are wrong bring about anything right. Some of the most exasperated and contrary children are those whose antisocial behavior is really a plea to be shown how to behave cooperatively. Permissiveness constantly deprives children of examples of adult-centered life, where they can find the place they seek in a natural hierarchy of greater and lesser experience, where their desirable actions are accepted and their undesirable actions rejected, while they themselves are always accepted. Children need to see that they are assumed to be well-intentioned, naturally social people who are trying to do the right thing and who want reliable reactions from their elders to guide them. A child seeks information about what is done and not done. So, if he breaks a plate, he needs to see some anger or sadness at its destruction, but not a withdrawal of esteem for him, as though he were not also angry or sad at having let it slip and had not resolved on his own initiative to be more careful. If permissive parents do not distinguish between desirable and undesirable acts, the child often behaves more interruptively and disruptively in order to force his parents to play their correct part. Then, when they cannot bear any more imposition upon their patients, the parents may explode with all their pent-up anger at the child himself, perhaps telling him they have had enough and sending him out of sight. The message he gets is that all his previous behavior, which they were tolerating, was in fact bad, that they were misrepresenting their true feelings at the time, and that the irredeemable badness of the child finally brought their pretense of acceptance of him to an end. The game is defined this way in many households, whose children come to see that they are expected to try to get away with as much undesirable behavior as possible before the axe falls, when they will be revealed in their true colors as unacceptable. In some extreme cases, when parents, often having had their first child late in life, dote so disastrously on their little darlings that they never show any signs of distinguishing between what is to be done and what is not to be done. The children are nearly mad with frustration. They rebel at each new plea. Would you like to have this? Would you like to do that? Would you like to eat? To do? To wear? What do you want mommy to do? And so on. I knew a most beautiful 2.5-year-old girl who was treated like that. Already she never smiled. Her parents' ever fawning suggestion of something that might please her, she greeted with scowls of discontent and obstinate repetitions of no. Her rejection made them even more abject, and so the desperate game went on. The little girl was never able to get her parents to set an example from which she could learn, because they were always looking for guidance. They would have given her anything she wanted, but could not understand her real need for them to be engaged in living their own lives as adults, with her in the midst. The enormous amount of energy expended by children in trying to get attention is not because they need attention itself. They are signaling that their experience is unacceptable and are only trying to get a caretaker's attention in order to correct it. A lifelong impulse to seek attention is simply a continuation of the frustrated child's failure to get it in the first place, until the search for notice becomes a goal in itself, a sort of compulsive contest of wills. So a form of parental attention that only brings more signals from the child is clearly an inappropriate one. Natural logic forbids belief in the evolution of a species with the characteristic of driving its parents to distraction by the millions. A look at other millions of parents in third world countries who have not had the privilege of being taught to stop understanding and trusting their children, reveals families living in peace and with an eager and useful addition to the family labor force in every child over the age of 4. That is so interesting. She spoke on that. I feel that I have had so many experiences with people throughout my life where they come to me seeking to play out this parental wound of permissiveness. And I, in my logical mind, think, I am not your mother, I am not your father, I am not your parent. It is not my responsibility to teach you what is right and to teach you what is wrong and to hold you accountable. I have my own life to live, and I'm not going to make any sort of assumptions about that. And I don't think I'm better than you, and you're responsible for that. And so I feel that I am treating them with this adult respect and that that should be appreciated. But in fact, is generally met with more pleas for attention, with more increasingly regressive and problematic, damaging, negative behavior that a lot of times they know to be that. But they don't understand the compulsion and like why they feel compelled to provoke me to anger and admonishment, and it's like they want me to tell them that you are worthless and that that is unacceptable. And it is unacceptable. The behavior is unacceptable. But if you have these unresolved childhood wounds, then you don't know how to receive that information of my actions are unacceptable without triggering that deep felt sense of I am unacceptable. I shouldn't exist. And so I've had so many adults in life treat me like their mother, seeking for me to set them straight, to pull the rug out from under them from that permissiveness and to tell them, no, like this is the line, you have to stop. And sometimes we do have to hold those lines with people because that's how they're coming at us. But it's just very interesting to know how completely unconscious it often is, that compulsion. And so they'll find a million reasons to explain their behavior. But essentially, at the end of the day, it is because they had a parent who was unavailable and under-resourced and had to try their best to keep their cool just to survive, and had too many things going on and just an unhealthy environment where eventually they can't take it anymore and they explode and they do irreparable feeling damage to that child's self-esteem in their emotional instability. That's probably coming also from the permissiveness and the inconsistency of their own parents, because their own parents were not really parents, they were children who were encouraged to procreate or to do procreative activities lightly as they see fit, and to make all kinds of excuses about why that's acceptable and appropriate. And then they feel this deep sense of shame that they don't feel like they're doing enough or they're doing it right because they never had what they needed. They never went through what they needed to go through. They didn't have that initiation. They didn't heal this stuff. They're at more of a disadvantage than the parents that raised babies thousands of years ago. And so this isn't even, maybe you'll never have kids yourself. But regardless, for all of you, whether you will or you won't have children of your own, this is where it has to start. Because you will just pass the same patterns on to your children if you don't go through these processes, go through these initiations intentionally before you choose to bring those children into the world. And again, it's not to shame people who have made those decisions that have re-victimized us generation after generation. We have to understand why people don't see it and don't acknowledge it and don't do something to change it. New thoughts on psychotherapy. My approach to healing the effects of the deprivations of childhood has evolved from an attempt to reproduce the missed experiences themselves to converting the harmful messages, conscious and unconscious, that remain in the psyche as a result of those missed experiences. I have found in my own practice as a psychotherapist that one can commute one's low or negative expectations of oneself and the world by thoroughly understanding what the expectations are, how they got there, and why they are false. The most ingrained feeling of inadequacy is, at its very origin, an innate knowledge of one's true worthiness. This knowledge is betrayed and eroded by experiences that impose erroneous beliefs, beliefs that in infancy and childhood one is unable to question. Fears, nameless, shapeless threats of consequences too dire to contemplate, cut off any freedom of action or even of thought that may lie in their direction. These fears are sometimes so restricting that one is at liberty only to live one's life in the self-imposed equivalent of a prison yard. Tracking down these terrors to their beginnings reveals them to be experiences that, when finally envisaged by the adult, are recognized as frightening only to a child. The ceaseless, draining effort to keep oneself from coming face to face with that dread is finally abandoned, and the part of one's life that was held in thrall by it comes at last into its own. One can then allow oneself to do or be whatever has been forbidden, to be successful or to fail, to be a nice guy or to stop being such a nice guy. To love or to accept being loved, to take risks or to stop taking risks, without an inappropriate compulsion that prevents the best use of one's judgment, instinctive and intellectual. Instinctive and intellectual. In the late 1970s, during the last of his 30 years of pioneering research in abreaction therapy, I was able to join Dr. Frank Lake in some of the work at his center in Nottingham, England. He had read this book and was keen to show me that the offenses to people's sensibilities, about which I am so concerned, do not begin at birth, but in the equally formative time in utero. The dramatic reliving of these experiences by his many subjects, and subsequently by some of mine, convinced me that he was right, especially since he produced the abreactions in me before I had seen anyone else curled up in fetal helplessness, moving limbs in that special way, making sounds and expressing emotions that I came to recognize as characteristic of that stage. I still make use of this technique when clients arrive at a point where they need to know about their birth, early infant, or intrauterine experience. It has been my impression that abreacting, dramatic though it is not often therapeutic in itself. The value of the experience lies in its contribution to the subject's information, which is then integrated into his new understanding of how things really are, as opposed to how he always believed them to be. Occasionally, an abreaction turns up the last piece of a puzzle, making possible the leap from understanding to realization. when one's spontaneous behavior fully comes to reflect the discovered truth. But it is the truth itself that brings about transformation, and apparently only the truth, no matter how it is acquired, by determined detective work employing induction and sometimes deduction, by reevaluation of beliefs unexamined since they were formed in childhood, usually concerned with goodness and badness, as well as through abreaction or data gleaned from others who had no investment in forgetting some event that in its time seemed cataclysmic to the subject. The liberating results of this process usually begin to appear quite quickly, and major transformations take months rather than years. In light of the continuum concept, a person seeking help is an inherently right creature whose species-specific needs have not been met and whose precisely evolved expectations may have been greeted and treated with self-righteous denial or condemnation by those whose roles should have been to respect and fulfill them. Unresponsive parents, unfortunately, make the child feel that he is not lovable or deserving or somehow good enough. He cannot, by his nature, convince them to be wrong. It must be himself. So when he can thoroughly realize that his crying, sulking, self-doubt, apathy, or rebellion were correct human responses to his incorrect treatment, his whole feeling about himself as the wrong one, leading him to become the invisible one, or leading him to be the know-it-all, changes appropriately. A review of a person's history in that light, I find, has in itself a salutary effect. It creates a healing atmosphere for someone accustomed to being made to feel unworthy, unwelcome, or guilty. I have been glad to hear that many other psychotherapists have found the continuum concept useful too for themselves, their students, and the people they are treating. Indeed, in the decades since this book first appeared, a far more hospitable climate for its ideas has developed in many quarters: obstetrics, childcare, social institutions, psychology, and in the general public, in a widening search for trustworthy principles by which to live. I was particularly encouraged to see the description of a film character in a recent Time magazine review, which read, "Her sense of social responsibility is informed by unimpeachable instinct, not by suspect ideology." I hope that this new edition, as well as those coming out in other languages, will help to allow unimpeachable instinct increasingly to inform our very suspect ideology. London, 1985. Yeah, this is quite an old copy. If you're just tuning in now, I will see you on the playback. We just read the introduction from The Continuum Concept by Jean Lidloff. The tagline on this book says, "In Search of Happiness Lost." Maybe I'll make that the title of this video. And we will get into the rest of the chapters there. It is a little bit dense. It is like a college level anthropology type of book. So if, the vocabulary or something is too much for you, there's that. Just so you're informed ahead of time. But I do think that it's very relevant to a lot of you. And if you were resonating with any of the parts of this message here today, then I think you might appreciate the rest of that. because this is a process of illumination. If we allow children who have been made to feel like so isolated and so essentially wrong about themselves to remain in this place of ego defense, of harming everybody around them because they believe that they're essentially bad and they have to live up to those expectations because they're a child trying to live up to expectations. They're trying to be good because they were told that they were bad and they need to make it better, so they have to be not bad anymore. But the only way you ever come to truly resolve that is not by trying to force it. It's by gaining more information, more knowledge, by gaining that illumination where you realize, I'm not broken, I'm not bad. I was born into a fallen world in more ways than one. I was born into an environment that was incapable of meeting my natural and evolutionarily appropriate needs. There's absolutely nothing inappropriate about your response to your mistreatment. And there are very, very academically supported lines of thought to back that up. And so if you need that, if you need to explore that, if you need to explore it on a more like spiritual lens or anything, do that. Because the more you know, if you didn't know, if you didn't know that you're good and that you were born into a world that is not good, that was not good for you, that was not good to you, and that doesn't reflect anything on your worthiness or your value or anything, that's how we heal the world. And whether we have children of our own or we just impact the children of this world with our presence, healing those inner child wounds, processing that unprocessed grief, holding your inner child as you do this learning, as you do this reading, as you do this reflecting, as you do this studying, and you will come to understand, not just in a knowledge way, but in an embodied way, who you truly are. And that may have been taken away from you, maybe at a very early age. So you had the trauma. We all do. Living here, being in this society, being in this culture that is inherently violent and inappropriate. And healing and sweetness, opening up to sweetness, receiving sweetness, consuming sweetness, growing the sweetness. This is conflicting seeming energy, right? But it's bittersweet. It's the truth. It's an arc. It's a redemption arc. And so what are you going to do? Are you going to believe that it's so painful to live in this reality that I have to spend all of my energy defending my ego, protecting myself? Or do I not need to protect myself because there was never anything to protect myself from? My parents were wrong. They're not bad people. They were also told things that were wrong by people that were supposed to be able to care for them. And it's a cultural issue. But the way that you change cultural issues is by changing yourself. And then having so many people that do that, that it ripples upwards and affects the community. No change that comes from force or shame or coercion ever lasts. And that's why I think attachment parenting is a really important thing for us to talk about, especially as we work through these shadow elements. And I love the way that she talks about it in the introduction to help us to understand like our hesitancy to to go down this rabbit hole and to have this conversation, because it not only causes you to confront yourself, to confront reality, to confront your culture that you may identify with in some ways. You may have to do this whole deconstruction process. You will have to do this whole deconstruction process. You don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Your culture and your family gave you good things too. But that cannot be, well, you can't only look at that. You can't be in denial and say, well, my parents tried the best they can. Well, they decided to be a mom. Well, they worked so hard. Well, and try and dismiss your own feelings of rejection and betrayal as, oh, I'm just a baby. I'm just immature. I don't know what's good for me. And what's good for me is to be rejected and betrayed. Oh, you just don't know any better. But they do. They know better. Babies know better than their parents do, because they are undefiled by all of the mental patterns that trap us and distract us and confuse us. And that's what babies are for, is to help bring our attention back to where our attention belongs, is to bring us back to God, is to bring us back to our hearts, is to bring us back to the moment, is to bring us back to the truth. And if you can truly, deeply empathize with an infant in that way, where you're able to go through the process of what it's like to be born in a hospital and ripped away from your mother's arms and left in a sterile cage under bright lights, to have things shoved up your butt, to have, to have your cries ignored, to have your microbiome stripped. Like, all of the distress that we go through, we not only normalize that to other parents, to each other as adults, but we normalize that to our children. We tell them there's something wrong with you for communicating your distress. There's nothing wrong here. You shouldn't be distressed. You have everything you need that we think you need. And you don't need anything that we don't think you need. So you better start paying attention to what we think you need, and you better stop paying attention to what you feel that you need. You must start disassociating from your desires, from your needs, from your feelings, because they're inherently wrong. They were wrong. It doesn't have to be this big shame spiral. You don't have to attack people for hurting you. You don't have to defend your position aggressively. You don't have to hide away who you are. You never had to do any of that stuff. That's very funny. I am not a counselor that is put, um, who has put all of that time and effort and validation into the current system of psychotherapy. I feel like there's a lot that is very problematic in the academic world around mental health at the moment. So that's not something that I have pursued. But the word you used was funny, because I have been a massage therapist since I was right out of high school. So there is that. Yeah. So you're walking a line. I don't remember where I heard this recently, but it's like you're walking through a doorway and most people don't see the doorway because there's this like pain or there's this like sweetness. So you like either focus on your need to be defensive and like hard and avoidant, or you like focus on the other side. And it opens up an entirely new possibility and a doorway that most people don't even see and acknowledge, to work with both at the same time, to not drop one, to not spiritually bypass, and to not materially bypass, to not be sold out to one extreme or the other, to not be trying to get to one end or the other. It's that middle path energy. And in the middle path, there are beautiful things. There's enlightenment, and there's all kinds of pleasurable experiences and samadhi, but like, also, life is suffering. That's part of that thought, that worldview, you know. And so people say, well, if you accept that life is suffering, then that's a negative mindset. Or if you accept that all things work together for good and God's plan is in action and there's nothing to worry about, you could also see that as problematic or see that as the solution. But neither of them are, never is. You need both in dynamic influence with one another, not even balanced perfectly all the time, just both working together. Don't drop one. What is this giving? Juggling. Well, I was gonna say cups, but juggling pentacles. Oh, I just realized they were talking about that Indian woman on the bus, right? Confirmation. So keep juggling, and your arms will get stronger, and you'll get smoother with it, and it'll become more and more a part of your identity. But this isn't your identity, and this isn't your identity. Your identity is your soul, your identity is God, your identity is the truth, and that always lies somewhere in between. If you are missing suffering, if you are missing sweetness, if you don't have any of one of those in your life, if you're avoiding at all costs one of those in your life, well, you're just not going to get to that unprocessed grief. You're just not going to change the way that you live your life, which means that you're going to operate based off of the patterns, the conditioning, the systems that you were born into. And you will be re-victimizing a new generation. And there's also, well, I was going to say there's no shame in that. It is a choice that you're free to make. But there's something different in making a decision after knowing better. You know now, at least some part of you knows, that you are good, that you were always good, and that you don't need to be perfect, you don't need to hurry. You just need to keep going. And don't drop either of the balls. You're always going to need one of them. It's always going to come back around. And if you can utilize the dark and the light in a dynamic and productive way, then not only will you prevent you recreating those patterns and re-victimizing people, but you will inspire and activate other people to do the same and to make it easier and easier and more exponentially possible and likely and easy and fun, and it's gonna be a service to the world if you decide to move in that way. Thank you so much for being here. Love, light, and peace, and personal responsibility. Yeah. I hope you have a beautiful day, and I will see you next time.